The first time I suspected something was wrong, I was standing in my own walk-in refrigerator, holding a truffle that smelled like my future crumbling. My name is Elena Rossi. I'm a chef, not the kind you see on TV, screaming at line cooks, the kind who wakes at 3 a.m. to check on a sourdough starter, who has burn scars on both forearms, who can tell you the exact temperature at which a perfect hollandaise breaks. I inherited my restaurant, Rosso, from my grandmother, who inherited it from her mother. 4 generations of women in my family, standing over the same stove, feeding the same small town of Hudson Valley foodies who didn't know a shallot from a scallion, but knew they loved my grandmother's lasagna. I loved that restaurant more than I loved my husband. That should have been my first clue. Marco and I met at culinary school. He was handsome in the way Italian men are handsome. Dark eyes, strong jaw, a smile that said, "I know something you don't know." He could cook too. Not as well as me, but well enough. We fell in love over a shared obsession with perfect pasta dough. We married in my grandmother's garden, under a string of lights that she'd hung herself, and we danced to Dean Martin until the neighbours complained. My sister, Gianna, was my maid of honour. She cried during the vows. I thought they were happy tears. Gianna was 2 years younger, softer, the one who'd stayed home to take care of our mother when I'd run off to Paris for a stage at a 3 Michelin star kitchen. She didn't cook. She couldn't boil water without burning it. But she could smile, and she could listen, and she could make people feel like they were the most important person in the room. I trusted her with everything. That was my mistake. The discovery happened on a Tuesday. I was doing inventory, counting cases of San Marzano tomatoes, when my sous chef, a quiet woman named Priya, came down to the basement. "Chef," she said, "there's something you need to see." She handed me her phone. On the screen was an article from Food and Wine magazine. The headline, "Il Segreto, a new star, rises in the Hudson Valley." I read the first paragraph. Chef Marco Rossi and his sister-in-law, Gianna Vitale, have opened a stunning new restaurant just 20 minutes from the original Rosso, featuring dishes that feel both nostalgic and revolutionary. The famous 7-layer lasagna, the saffron risotto, the roasted quail with polenta. My recipes, my grandmother's recipes, the ones I'd spent years perfecting, the ones I'd shared with Marco in confidence, the ones I'd taught Gianna how to make in my own kitchen, just for fun because she said she wanted to learn. I scrolled down to the photographs. There was Marco, in chef's whites, looking handsome and earnest. There was Gianna, serving as the front of house, her smile radiant. And there, in the background of one shot, was a wall of framed photographs, the same wall of photographs I had in Rosso, showing my grandmother, my mother, me. They had copied everything, the recipes, the decor, the family story. They had stolen my life. Part 2. The confrontation. I drove to Il Segreto that night, after service. The restaurant was closed, but there were lights on inside. I banged on the back door until Marco opened it. He looked at me like he'd been expecting me. Not surprised, not guilty. Just tired. "Elena." "Don't Elena me." I pushed past him into the kitchen. It was beautiful. White marble counters, copper pots, a wood-fired oven. My dream kitchen, the one I described to him 100 times. "You stole my recipes." I adapted them. "You stole my grandmother's lasagna recipe, the one she taught me when I was 12, the one I've never written down, the one I told you in confidence, in our bed, at 3 a.m. He didn't answer. Gianna appeared in the doorway. She was wearing a silk blouse and high heels, even in the kitchen. "Eleanor, let us explain." "Explain? You're my sister. My sister. I nursed you through mono. I paid for your college when Mom couldn't. I gave you a job at Rosso when you couldn't find work, and this is how you repay me?" Gianna's face hardened. "You want to know the truth? You were suffocating. Rosso was your baby, your obsession, your everything. You never asked what I wanted. You never asked what Marco wanted. We were just supporting characters in the Elena Rossi show. So you decided to stage a coup?" "We decided to build something of our own," Marco said. "Something you couldn't control." I looked at them, these 2 people I had loved, and I felt something crack inside me. Not my heart. That had been cracking for years, I realized. No, what cracked was my patience, my generosity, my willingness to be the bigger person. You want to build something of your own? I said. Fine. But you built it on my foundation, my recipes, my family history, my grandmother's face on your wall. We changed the recipes, Gianna said. Not enough. I walked out. I didn't look back. I went home to the apartment I'd shared with Marco, the apartment that was now just mine, since I'd thrown him out a week ago when I'd found the credit card receipts for restaurant supplies I'd never ordered. And I sat on the floor of the kitchen and I cried. Then I stopped crying. Then I started planning. Part 3. The long climb revenge, I learned, is not about anger. Anger is a firework, bright, loud, and gone in seconds. Revenge is a kiln. It takes time and heat and patience. You have to fire the clay, shape it, glaze it, fire it again, and if you do it right, what comes out is unbreakable. The first thing I did was sell my half of Rosso to Marco. He'd offered to buy me out, thinking I'd take the money and disappear. I named a price, triple what the restaurant was worth, and he paid it. He had investors now. He could afford it. I took that money and I went to New York City. I spent a year working for a chef I hated, at a restaurant I didn't respect, learning everything I could about the business side of the industry. I learned about supply chains and profit margins and labor laws. I learned about marketing, branding, social media. I learned that being a good cook wasn't enough. You had to be a good businesswoman, a good liar, a good actress. I also learned about sabotage, not the petty kind, the kind that comes back on you, the strategic kind, the kind that looks like coincidence. By the end of that year, I had a reputation. Not as Elena Rossi, the wronged wife, but as Elena Vance. I'd taken my grandmother's maiden name, a fierce, talented chef who'd appeared out of nowhere. I had investors. I had a location. I had a concept. I was going to open a restaurant across the street from Il Segreto. Part 4. The construction. The space I'd found was a derelict warehouse on the same block as Marco and Gianna's place. It had been empty for a decade, full of pigeons and broken glass. Everyone thought I was crazy to buy it. I hired an architect, a woman named Simone who'd been fired from Marco's renovation team after she'd refused to cut corners. Simone hated Marco almost as much as I did. She designed a restaurant that was everything Il Segreto wasn't: warm, intimate, unpretentious. Exposed brick and mismatched chairs and an open kitchen where customers could watch me cook. I named it La Rinascita, the rebirth. Construction took 8 months. During those 8 months, I watched Il Segreto from across the street. I watched the lines form at lunch. I watched the critics arrive, the bloggers, the influencers. I watched Marco and Gianna's faces in the window, smug and victorious. I also watched their mistakes. Their pasta machine broke 3 times. Their dishwasher quit twice. Their reviews started to slip. Inconsistent, overpriced. The magic is gone. They'd expanded too fast, opened a second location in the city, spread themselves thin. Marco was cooking at both restaurants, commuting 2 hours each way. Gianna was trying to run front of house at both, and she wasn't a people person. Not really. She was a performer, and the performance was wearing thin. I took notes. Every mistake, every complaint, every opportunity. When La Rinascita opened, I would be ready. Part 5. The opening night. I chose the opening date carefully, the same night as Il Segreto's 3rd anniversary gala. Marco and Gianna had planned a big party. Live music, a special tasting menu, press from 3 cities. They'd invited every food critic within 100 miles. They'd spent thousands on flowers, champagne, and a custom ice sculpture. I opened my doors at 6 o'clock, with no fanfare, no press release, no invitation. Just a handwritten sign in the window, La Rinascita. Grand opening. Walk-ins welcome. The first customer arrived at 6:07, a woman who'd been walking her dog, curious about the lights. I served her a bowl of tomato soup. Not my grandmother's, something new, something I'd created in the dark hours of my worst nights. She ate it in silence, then looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "My mother used to make soup like this," she said. I smiled. That's the idea. By 7:30, the restaurant was full. Word had spread. People had seen the lights, smelled the garlic, heard the laughter. They came in out of curiosity and stayed for the food. I cooked every dish myself, with Priya, my sous from Rosso, who'd quit when Marco had tried to cut her pay, running the line with me. We were a small team, but we were fierce. By 9:00, The critics had started to drift across the street. Not all of them. Some were loyal to Marco or afraid of Gianna's temper. But enough. Enough to notice. Enough to write. I watched from my kitchen window as Marco stood in the doorway of Il Segreto watching the crowd at La Rinascita. His face was unreadable. Gianna was behind him, talking rapidly into her phone, gesturing wildly. I didn't feel satisfied. Not yet. This was just the first course. Part 6. The campaign. The reviews came out a week later. La Rinascita got 4 stars from The Times, a rave from the local alt weekly, and a mention in a national blog that called me the most exciting new chef in the Hudson Valley. Il Segreto got 3 stars, a lukewarm mention, and a paragraph about inconsistency and the shadow of a more talented family member. Gianna called me the next day. I let it go to voicemail. This isn't over, Elena. You think you can just waltz back into town and steal our customers? You're nothing. You're a has-been. A bitter, lonely woman who couldn't keep her husband or her restaurant. I saved the voicemail. I played it for my lawyer. Then I played it for a journalist who was writing a profile on me for Food and Wine. The profile came out 2 weeks later. It was titled The Rebirth of Elena Rossi. It told the story of my grandmother, my training, my marriage, my betrayal. It quoted the voicemail. It included photographs of Rosso, my original restaurant, and La Rinascita, and a small, grainy photograph of Marco and Gianna standing outside Il Segreto. It didn't accuse them of anything. It just laid out the facts. The facts were damning enough. Within a month, Il Segreto had lost half its reservation book. The second location closed. Marco's investors started asking questions. Gianna's smiling face disappeared from the website. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just kept cooking. Part 7. The collapse. 9 months after La Rinascita opened, Marco filed for bankruptcy. I heard about it from Priya, who'd heard it from a friend who'd heard it from the landlord. Il Segreto was closing. The bank was seizing the assets. Marco and Gianna were being sued by their investors for fraud. Apparently, they'd misrepresented their financials to secure the second location. I walked across the street that evening. The restaurant was dark, empty, the tables stripped, the bar bare. Marco was sitting on the curb, his chef's whites stained and wrinkled, his face grey. Elena, he said. Marco. You won. I sat down next to him. This wasn't about winning. Then what was it about? I thought about my grandmother, her hands kneading dough, her voice humming old Italian songs. I thought about the nights I'd spent in that kitchen, learning, burning, crying, growing. I thought about the recipes Marco had stolen, the history he'd tried to erase. It was about making sure everyone knew the truth, I said. That the food was mine, the family was mine, the story was mine. You could have built something of your own, Marco. You chose to steal mine instead. He didn't answer. I stood up. Gianna? She left. Last week, took the car and the dog and the bank account, said she couldn't handle the pressure. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I'm not going to apologize, I said. I'm not going to forgive you, but I am going to offer you a job. Dishwasher, minimum wage. You show up at 6 a.m., you leave at midnight. You don't talk to anyone. If you're serious about cooking, really serious. Not the fame, not the money, the cooking. You can learn again. From the bottom. Marco looked up at me. Why would you do that? Because my grandmother taught me that everyone deserves a second chance, but only one. He took the job. He's been washing dishes at La Rinascita for 2 years now. He's good at it. Quiet, efficient, invisible. He doesn't look at me when I pass. He doesn't speak unless spoken to. Gianna moved to Florida, opened a food truck, failed, moved again. I don't know where she is. I don't care. La Rinascita got a Michelin star last year. I stood on the stage holding the plaque and I thought about my grandmother. I thought about the night I'd discovered the betrayal, the months of despair, the years of rebuilding. And I smiled. Revenge isn't about destroying the other person. It's about becoming the person they were afraid you'd become. I am that person now, and I am never going back.